You wake up on a normal weekday. Before anything happens, you check a number, not because you need to, just to see where things stand. A few minutes later, you're already doing quiet math. Not about bills, not about mistakes, about how long things would last if something shifted. By basic logic, this shouldn't be happening. You earn enough, you're not in trouble. On paper, this is where the mind is supposed to relax. But it doesn't. It leans forward, as if the present isn't solid yet. Sometimes the numbers even move the right way. Your income goes up by 20%, your savings cross a round number you once thought would feel safe, and instead of relief, the calculation resets. Same question, new baseline. This isn't because you're careless or bad with money. People who plan, people who are disciplined, people who did what they were told to do feel this too. What's strange is where the thoughts point, not at what you have, but at what could break it. How many months you're covered, what number would finally be enough, and why that number never stays put. We usually explain this away, mindset, personality, habits. But that explanation is too small. There is a specific reason this thinking doesn't stop. Not a personal one, something built into how money, security, and the future are tied together now. And until you see it, the math never really feels finished. You can be doing everything right, and the thoughts still don't leave. Nothing is on fire, no overdue bills, no urgent emails. You're not improvising to get through the month. Most days, your finances are objectively fine. If someone asked you to explain your situation, you could point to the numbers and say, "It's stable," and that would be accurate. And yet, the thinking runs in the background. It's there while you're working, while you're making coffee, while you're waiting for something else to start. Not loud enough to feel like panic, not sharp enough to feel like fear, more like a low electrical hum that never fully shuts off. It's rarely about spending in the obvious sense. Most of the time, it's not about money leaving your account today. It's about money staying where it is tomorrow, about how long that would last if nothing changed, or if something small did. You catch it in quick, almost invisible moments. You open an app and close it a second later. You do a half-second calculation you didn't plan to do. You round numbers in your head not because precision matters, but because orientation does. 3 months, 6 months, a year, 12 paychecks, 52 weeks. Not as a plan, just as a reference point. It's like driving with a warning light that never turns red. The car runs fine, the engine sounds normal, but the light stays on, so part of your attention stays there with it. Not because you expect a breakdown today, just because the system keeps asking you to stay aware. Over time, this stops feeling like a signal and starts feeling like weather. You don't ask why it's there, you just dress for it mentally. The noise becomes part of the environment, like traffic in a city. You only notice it when it's gone. At some point, you may even forget there was a time when your mind wasn't doing this math automatically, when money was something you checked occasionally, not a variable quietly updating in the corner of every other thought. And when you compare notes with other people, carefully, you realize it's not just you. People with different incomes, different responsibilities, different lifestyles. The amounts change, the timelines shift, the hum doesn't. Which raises an uncomfortable question. If the situation is stable and the danger isn't immediate, why does the noise stay on at all? When your first income goes up in a noticeable way, you expect something simple to happen. Fewer calculations, less checking, a sense that the numbers can finally be trusted to take care of themselves. But what usually changes isn't the presence of calculation, it's the shape of it. When you earned less, the math was blunt. Rent, utilities, groceries, a fixed amount leaving the account every month. You knew roughly how many months you could stay afloat if the paycheck stopped. The margin was thin, but it was concrete. You could point at it. After a raise, that margin widens, and instead of disappearing, the thinking spreads into it. You're no longer just tracking what goes out each month. You start running quiet variations. If income drops by 10%, if expenses rise next year, if one bonus doesn't repeat, if a temporary cost quietly becomes permanent. The math stops being about paying bills and starts about how fragile the setup really is. A 20% raise doesn't remove the spreadsheet in your head. It adds columns. You notice it in ordinary decisions. You accept a higher fixed payment because it fits now. You commit to a longer contract because the number's still clear. On paper, everything is fine, but each decision quietly converts flexibility into obligation. Less room to adjust, more assumptions that have to keep holding. None of this feels reckless or anxious. It feels responsible. The higher the income, the more the future starts asking precise questions. Not, can you afford this today, but can you still afford this if something shifts? The timeline stretches. So does the list of things that could break the math. So the mind doesn't relax. It recalibrates. More money doesn't switch off the internal accountant. It promotes it. The job changes from watching the present to defending the distance between now and the version of stability you're trying to maintain. And once that distance exists, it rarely stays quiet for long. You rarely think about money as something you have right now. Much more often it exists as a shield against the future. Not as a number in an account, but as a promise that tomorrow won't catch you off guard. Money in your head isn't present tense. It's a constant what if. The morning can be calm. Payday is weeks away, the bills are paid, nothing is obviously wrong. And still, your thoughts drift forward. You start running quiet simulations, next month, next year, small shifts that could turn into problems. What if prices rise? What if work becomes less stable? What if health, a move, family plans, or the market nudges things off balance? At that point, money stops being accounting. It becomes forecasting. Financial thinking rarely feels like bookkeeping. It's closer to running a weather station. You're not focused on how sunny it is right now. You're watching the radar, scanning for storms. Even good numbers feel provisional, like clear skies that could change overnight. So calm doesn't automatically arrive, even when everything looks fine on paper. The system around you reinforces this way of thinking. Salaries, loans, subscriptions, investments, almost all of it is designed around continuity. Not today, but the next payment cycle. Not this year, but the years that follow. Most financial decisions aren't really about the life you're living now. They're about whether that life will hold together later. You live half a step ahead of yourself, constantly checking whether your buffer is enough if the road bends unexpectedly. That's why the anxiety feels oddly detached. It isn't always tied to real scarcity. Sometimes it shows up precisely when there's room to calculate, when there's something worth protecting, when the future becomes detailed enough to model again and again. And the more scenarios you can imagine, the harder it becomes to stop. At a certain point, something becomes clear. The tension doesn't come from an empty wallet, it comes from an endless mental simulator. Money inside it isn't a goal or a finish line, it's fuel for projections. And as long as the future keeps replaying, the thinking doesn't switch off even if the present has been stable for a long time already. You rarely make a conscious decision to compare yourself. It doesn't start with another person standing next to you. There's no checklist, no ranking, no clear moment where it begins. And yet, somewhere in the background, a benchmark quietly settles in. You can be alone, scrolling, working, walking through an ordinary day. No one is evaluating you out loud, no one is pointing or asking questions, but the environment is still doing its work. Prices, ads, apartment sizes, travel photos, the pace of updates, all of it forms a sense of what feels normal. From that, a standard appears. Not announced, not negotiated, just present, like entering a room where the temperature was set before you arrived. This kind of comparison doesn't need people. It works more like atmospheric pressure. You don't actively notice it, but you adjust to it anyway. A purchase you made easily last year now triggers hesitation. A stable situation suddenly feels slightly behind. Nothing specific happened, no clear signal changed, but your internal scale moved. At a system level, that's how norms form, not through explicit examples, but through repetition. The same signals seen day after day stop feeling optional, they begin to feel like the baseline. Not because someone told you where the line is, but because everything around you quietly implies it. It's like standing on a moving walkway at an airport. You might think you're standing still, but the ground keeps carrying you forward. If you don't move, there's still motion. If you do move, it's hard to tell how much of that effort is yours and how much is built into the system beneath your feet. That's where the discomfort comes from. Not sharp envy, not open competition, more a low, constant unease, the sense of being measured against something you never agreed to measure yourself by. The comparison isn't loud, it's ambient. And precisely because it's silent, it's difficult to turn off even when no one else is around. There's a point where safety stops feeling like something you have and starts feeling like something you rent. Early on, it's relatively cheap, a small buffer, a few months covered, knowing that if something breaks or work slows briefly, you won't panic. That kind of calm doesn't demand much attention. But over time, the price quietly changes. Not because you're doing worse, because the meaning of safe updates in the background. What once felt solid at 3 months starts to feel thin. 6 begins to sound responsible. 12 starts to feel like the baseline. The same numbers no longer buy the same sense of calm. Part of this is simple math. Most costs don't happen once, they repeat. Rent renews, insurance recalculates, fixed expenses creep upward without asking permission. A life that felt stable last year costs more to keep stable this year, even if nothing visibly changed. And part of it is expectation. Safety isn't measured against today, it's measured against imagined futures. What if income pauses for a quarter? What if expenses spike at the wrong time? What if one stable assumption quietly fails? Each scenario adds a surcharge. The feeling you're trying to preserve becomes more expensive than the moment you're living in. It's like heating a house with thinning insulation. You turn the dial higher, not because you want more warmth, but because the outside air feels closer than it used to. The system keeps reminding you how provisional comfort really is. So anxiety doesn't arrive as a sudden shock. It arrives as inflation. More savings required for the same sleep, more planning for the same neutrality, more attention just to feel steady. From the outside, this can look excessive. From the inside, it feels proportional. A rational response to a world where security has to be continuously re-earned, not simply achieved. Safety didn't vanish, it just started costing more than it used to, not in money alone, but in constant awareness of what the future might demand next. At some point, the pressure stops feeling like a personal failure and starts to look like a pattern. Not something you fix or escape or solve, just something you can finally see. The system doesn't relax once you understand it. It keeps updating, recalculating, asking for more certainty than the present can ever fully provide. Safety still shifts. Expectations still stretch. The future still charges interest on your attention. None of that disappears. What changes is where the weight lands. When you recognize the loop, the tension stops pretending it's a warning you missed. It becomes a signal of how the system operates, how stability is maintained, not owned, how calm is negotiated, not stored, how the feeling of enough keeps moving, even when nothing obvious breaks. That doesn't make the thinking stop. You'll still check the numbers, still plan, still look ahead and quietly adjust your assumptions. But now those moments carry less confusion. The pressure has a shape. The unease has a source. The extra effort feels less mysterious. Understanding doesn't grant control over the system. It returns control over interpretation. And that's often the difference between feeling chased by the future and simply acknowledging that it's there. So, the next time your mind runs forward to buffers, scenarios, margins, it won't feel like a flaw in your thinking. It will feel like what it is, a rational response to a world that treats security as something ongoing, not something finished. If this way of looking at money and systems felt useful, you can quietly like the video or subscribe. We're still thinking.